I still get tired. You know, 45 minutes and then
they show states
the other one is the grass and stuff. That's another deal. The moment or the volunteer, I'll just keep playing.
Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. There we go. All right. Good to have everybody with us this morning. So we got quite a few running late. I'm sure they'll be here soon. I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the moms. Good to have a day where we can honor you all and knowing that not just the thing that we do, our country, but God has even instituted it in some things that He said about honor that goes to moms and dads and the importance behind it. So let's go ahead and jump into our questions real quick. This morning we're going to be talking about the memorial of Jordan Crossing. It had to do with the stones, big stones that they left there and picked them up, but a lot to do with the memory and the reminding of what's going on. Let's go ahead and jump to our questions. We go back all the way to John 2, during lesson 29. Describe Jesus' first miracle. What did he do? It's very simple. Turn water into wine. Describe the quality of the wine. What did the Bible say?
The best.
It was basically the best wine, exactly right. And so we go to the next question. How many books in all are there in the New Testament? 27. That's exactly right. All right. Back to Genesis 8. After the flood, what was God's promise concerning destroying all life ever again? He would never destroy it with water again, with the flood. Exactly right. We know the world and everything will be destroyed one day, but it won't be done in a way like that anymore. People will be able to live on the earth. Concerning seasons and days, what did He say? Do you remember that?
He said, just a minute, I'll get it. Seed time, harvest time, heat, cold. Then He said, winter and summer.
That's exactly right. That was it.
And then He said, fall and winter.
There you go. And so the fall and spring, actually, you said it when you said the harvest, and we see dealing with that, and we see the early. So He mentioned all this. Basically, what He's getting at is it's going to be different when we go, well, why? It was the same already, wasn't it? No, they were under canopy. Remember, it was different. There wasn't rain, was there? There wasn't any rain like that. So you didn't see the springtime, really. Things just stayed perfect, and that's what we saw on the earth. And so we see the difference now, and He reminds everybody of that. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Moses, Exodus 20. When God spoke to the children of Israel from Mount Sinai, how did they respond? They were excited, weren't they? They were jubilant, going crazy. What did they say?
They feared.
They feared it. They would really, put fear and awe into them. And so it said, why did God as we look at this, they didn't want the way they responded like that, but they also told Moses, they said, you talk to us and you talk to God. We'd rather hear God from you. And it scared them and everything. And why did God personally speak to the Israelites that way? What did He do for that time? So one time we see Him doing it really. What did He do that for?
He put the fear in them so they wouldn't sin.
Exactly right. Put the fear in them so they wouldn't sin, and that they would understand that faith that is found there in that as what we see. So that's exactly what we see, Exodus chapter 20. And we'll jump over now to Joshua chapter 1. Joshua follows Moses as the leader. And the question here is, what did God create on the first day? Genesis 1:3-5. You see, He divided the light from the darkness everywhere. Darkness was already there. There was nothing. It was void. And we see that. And then, remember, as we find that darkness isn't created. Darkness is always there. But light is created out of darkness, which reveals the darkness that we would see. What method did God use in creating? Genesis, I don't know why Joshua 1 says it there. What method did God use in creating?
He
spoke it into its existence. Exactly right. We jump to the next one. At Jericho, the Israelite spies went to the home of who? Joshua chapter 2, verse 1. Rahab. How did she hide them from the king of Jericho? She had to go up on the roof and hide under the flax. Exactly right, basically wheat. What did she tell the king's messengers who were looking for the spies? That they were not in her house. Remember that? Because don't say, was it really a lie or not? No, she lied. But she said they're not in her house or something. Well, they weren't. They were on the roof. Now, either way, it's a lie. But that's exactly what happened. And it brings the next one. The two spies told Rahab that she and her family would be spared when the Israelites took Jericho, if something very important.
She's
Hung in her house.
They'd hang the thing there, but where did all the family have to be? They had to be in her house, exactly right. If they weren't in her house, they were going to die. And of course, the cord that they escaped on would be the same one that they would remember seeing there in the windows, which just stated. Which brings us to the last question. What river did Joshua lead the Israelites crossing Canaan?
Jordan.
The Jordan. And what happened to the Jordan River when the feet of the priest carrying the ark entered the river? It separated, it went upward, basically. It stopped. And we see it didn't stop right there where they were. We talked about it. It stopped 20 miles actually north of them. And all the water, went all the way down to the Dead Sea. So you have one of this 35-mile stretch where there's no water at all, as we can see as they're crossing through that, crossing over it. Which brings us to Joshua now. We're going to talk about the memorial, as we said, of the Jordan crossing. And this is huge. This is really big because we only see the other time, of course, the Red Sea, but they didn't place anything there. There was nothing set up for a memorial. This was important because this land, when you cross the Jordan, you're entering into what land? Those what they call land, which God called the Promised Land, as we see here. Now remember, we would have, there would be 3 on the, half Manasseh, and the other would be 3 on this side of the Jordan. On the right side, basically the east side, and the west side would be the rest of the tribes, as we know, as we look at our map. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Remembering the victories is what we're getting at, verses 1 through 7, knowing that after Joshua and the people had crossed the Jordan, as we looked at Wednesday night, the Lord gave Joshua another command. And this command was found in verses 1 through 3. If someone will go and read that for us, please.
And it came to pass, when all the people had completed crossing over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourself 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourself 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood ye firm. You shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you lodged tonight.
Thank you. So when we look at this here, we go, why is God so caught up on reminding them of things, memory? Remember how the Israelites were, and, we were talking about Wednesday night, and Bill said, still can't grasp how they could go so quickly away from God. I'm sure we all feel that way, think that. And that's what it was. These were short-minded people. Meaning they weren't dumb or nothing like that. They just didn't remember things very well. They didn't remember the memories of the importance of what God had done for them. And so they would soon forget. God knew that. So he had just done this for them, decided, we need to put some stones here, a marker, where we remember, see, tell your children's children, your children's children, your children, just keep telling them, because these people wouldn't have done it. It seemed like if someone would have been there for someone to ask about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Has anything changed today?
Nope. We do the same thing today.
We still are sometimes short-minded.
Exactly right. The difference is today, I think, with us is, we have the Bible that we can carry around. We have it on our phones. We have basically, everybody has access to a Bible. And as we look at that, they didn't have that back then. Remember the scrolls? They weren't all carrying a scroll of everything that Moses had written. That's not what it was. So they had to be reminded, everything that the Israelites did for a long time, it all came from here. It came from what God had told them. And that's why it was so important why God said, remind your children in the morning when they're getting up, remind them in the afternoon during the day, or remind them when they go to bed. And that's what we see. But at the same time, God was telling those parents and all those Israelites, you need to remind yourself too. So he knew that their faith would be severely tested in the days to come. Because remember, they're going to go up against Jericho, and they're not going to really have to do a lot except walk. But still, at the sight, anything about Jericho, would really frighten. We think it's going to be a massive battle. He had Joseph order 12 men to take stones. We just read there from the right in the middle of the Jordan, where the priests had stood with the ark. And we need to notice how Joshua words these orders to these 12 men, as we find in verses 4 through 7, as he states this. So someone go and read this for us, please.
Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever.
Thank you. Now, nowhere does it say, that they couldn't be hewn stones, as we talked before, but they more likely they were. Because notice, the Jordan, we talked about how big the Jordan got during this time of year, about 1 mile to 2 miles across. It would actually get up to 100 feet deep at this time, where usually the normal time outside of the harvest season when it floods, it's only a couple feet deep. I mean, I'm talking 1 or 2 feet, maybe 3 at the most in certain spots. There's not much to it, but if you notice what he said, get it out of the middle of the Jordan. So these stones have more than likely been here for how long? See, yeah, it's a flood probably. I mean, you look at that since the Jordan created, it was there. And, it wasn't like someone set those stones in there. And that's really important to see. And because I've had some ask, well, why do you say out of the middle? Because remember where the middle is right now, really when the river's not flooded, it's not that wide. I mean, it's not even as wide as this room. It's smaller than that. There are certain areas where, but most of it's probably about as wide as these pews right here, actually, in some spots. And so God knew they'd get out of the middle of the beginning things that hadn't been touched. So we need to see the role, of course, number one, the ark in his commands is crucial. He did not tell them to go get stones from where the priests were standing, but he said, notice what he said again, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God. So go right past, basically, that area of what we know of God. The ark symbolized what? What does the ark always symbolize, the ark of the covenant? The presence of God, exactly right. And they need to remember it was not what they had done, but guess what? What God had done. They're not telling their children, guess what we did? We pushed that water back as hard as we could. We held that water back and we were able to cross and everything. That's not what happened. They said, God did this. It's all about God. They did not cross over the Jordan because they were all powerful, but because the Lord was all powerful. The purpose of the stones, once again, is to serve as a what for among them? Serve as a sign of remembrance, exactly as we would see here in the future. When your children ask what do these stones mean, you'll tell them. A stone is a monument, was commonly used in a memorial all throughout the east, I guess say that area of the world. A lot of times they'll pile rocks up. That happens a lot of times today. People do that in all different places. You think about Mount Everest. You go to Mount Everest because it's on the very top of it. Pile of rocks that humans have put there. And with all these other things that are there, of course, that we see. But, this is nothing new. You and I are used to memorials, seeing them, aren't we? I mean, we're used to, you think about in D.C., I was thinking about this because of us living up there, Melissa and I and the kids for all those years. And, you look at these, and this is what's interesting about it. When he says place the rocks there so you remind them what we've done. Notice these memorials right here. I don't know if you can. I can name them because I've been there a lot. Each and every one of them, you have, of course, the Washington Monument, you have the Washington Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, Korean Memorial, the Marine Corps Memorial, where you see with the flag, you have Martin Luther King Memorial, World War II Memorial, World War I Memorial, Holocaust Memorial, Vietnam Memorial, and it just keeps going on and on and on. I could have done many more, but, we get to the point where we look at this and we know what those mean. Washington Memorial represents what? Anybody know? Does it represent Washington or Washington, D.C.? See, that's a good question, isn't it? We look at that. See, we don't know. We really don't understand. It has to do with the area of Washington, D.C. itself, because there are other areas of Washington, the president, we would see. But, Jefferson, we know president there. Korea, we're all aware of all of these moments in life. And we remember them. If we saw a picture of them, we would know that. That's what this is for these Israelites. Remember, they didn't have cameras. They didn't have, the type of stuff we have today. They didn't have books with color pictures and so on. So they had to actually put something and remember what was there. This was not just to be a reminder, though, to them what the Lord had done for them, but also a reminder for the generations to come what God would continue to do for them. And notice, this would come with it, those who are faithful, because it took faith to cross that Jordan, and we know they did it. Mom, go ahead.
That's the pile of rocks,
right.
Didn't it? They raised an Ebenezer, which is a stone of help.
Yes, they did. It doesn't talk about here, but yes, we understand that a lot. And different stones mean different things. That's very good there about raising Ebenezer, the stone of help. And in fact, and God's gonna, and that's what we say. There's many all throughout the land, and for different things as we see there. Doug, go ahead.
Well, you gotta think too that everything at this time was all word of mouth because
Yep.
there weren't any scriptures at this time. And so the memorials that they set up, somebody in there would remember them and they would say, you know, well, what was this for, Daddy? Well, this was when we crossed the Jordan or you know, Granddaddy or whatever, you know. And that's the way it had to be for years and years, because if Moses wrote all the Old Testament, he had to write most of it while they were in the wilderness.
Right.
And so they had nothing to go by, no written word until then.
Exactly. And we even get to the, like I said, when we began Joshua, more than likely Joshua was the one that finished up the book of Deuteronomy there at the end about Moses dying and going up the mountain, because, you know, and God, and this is what's important. Nobody was there with him, so this is what I'll show you how God is with Joshua. God had to tell Joshua that, because Joshua didn't know God took him and buried him. You know, nobody was there. We see that, but that's exactly right, which at the same time, all this word of mouth. And, you know, remember, this is why it's also important. All the men that came into to the promised land, remember, they all died. All the ones that we see died, except for Caleb and Joshua. So you had memories continually having to be told of what was there. So we can see, you know, another reason, as we know, they were remembering. Notice what Joshua calls the ark, as we see the ark of the Lord your God. So he says, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God. This brings us back to the idea of the covenant that was made with him. We haven't looked at yet Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, but it has to do with this covenant of love. That's what this was actually called, knowing that God was there with them. The victory is supposed to be looked upon as an expression of God's covenant love that he has for the Israelites. But remember, God is even going to move this forward. It's not only going to be for the Israelites. Who all will be able to be a part of this? Be a part of God and Christ. Everyone. Remember, everyone has that ability and opportunity we see all the time. In fact, Deuteronomy, we haven't studied, but we're going to go back to it just a moment and read this. Deuteronomy 7:7-8, speaking about this covenant. If someone go and read it for us, please.
The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any other people. For you were the least of all peoples, but because the Lord loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
Thank you. So he makes it very clear that God did this because he loved them. And, you know, we always say God is love and the importance behind it, but we need to understand this wasn't just, you know, basically saying like, well, I'm your God, I'm your leader, you're going to follow me, it's just the way it's going to be, and if you don't like it, I'm just going to kill you off. I mean, that's not the way God was. You know, if God showed his love and they showed their love back to him, was God going to take care of them? Has he already proved that? He's proved that for 40 years without a doubt. He's taking care of them. We see this. So God does this thing. But he also brings victories. And he's going to continue to bring victories. And, you know, remembering things are very important, because as we get older, our memory, you know, kind of sometimes, you know, it kind of, people say, I forget everything. I just can't remember anything. This is the way I always look at it. You have so much up in your mind, you know, for so many years that you've lived on this earth, all that there and try to go through it, catalog through it. It's difficult at times, and we see that. Dad, go ahead.
You know, the one part that verse 7 is so important, because the Israelites were not as large as other people. And they could not do the conquering without God, without his love.
Exactly.
And that was important, that God wanted them to know that.
Yep. And you know, you look at this and we think, wait a minute, you're talking 2 to 3 million people. You know, you're only talking fighting age, probably just like it was before. Maybe it was probably over 600,000 now, probably 7 or 8. But still, we go, really, there was still less than most nations. And we see that and understand that, and exactly right. And that was the thing, was they didn't have to use their strength. Their strength needed to be in a spiritual strength and a faith for God. And you know, this is what's interesting. If they would have just had their faith completed the way it needed to be, God would have probably fought all the battles, every single one of them. But he didn't, because the way their faith was, he had to show them certain things. So once again, it comes to the memory and the mind of what we're doing. In fact, there's this little illustration I love. It's a story that I like about 3 older widows who lived together, and they were all sisters. This is what they said. One sister got up to go to bed. Halfway up the stairs, she stopped and asked, "Was I going up, or was I Coming down. Which way was I going here? You know, the memory's already gone. One sister that was sitting downstairs to reply, you know, with a hint of aggravation, you were going up to go to bed. And so she, okay. Second sister headed into the kitchen to make herself a sandwich. Once in the kitchen, she hollered back at her sister, who was still downstairs. What do you think she asked? What I come in here for? She couldn't remember. The sister responded again with a trace of irritation. You went in to make yourself a sandwich. After which she replied, I am so glad I am not as forgetful as both of you are. And she knocked on wood on the end table, then immediately got up and went to the door and said, who's here? So, you know, I mean, and, you know, that's kind of what, this is kind of what it is, you know, as we see here with the Israelites, you know, they would forget things so quickly. And so God had to put something there to remind them. So, you know, we'll laugh at things like this without a doubt, but it's exactly how it was, how people were treating God. And, you know, and just said a moment ago, it's really, it happens today too. You know, people are all about God and everything. Everything's going great in their life, and they may start to forget about God again. And then things start getting bad, and what do? Oh, God, I need help. I mean, and that's what we see. And, you know, and that's not, this is kind of what we saw with the Israelites. So, you know, God at times, you know, may give us, say, a financial victory. You know, the next time they'll be in financial trouble, start the word. Or maybe God gives us a victory in our spiritual lives. And then when trouble comes our way, what do? We either whine about it or we actually seek God's help. And we see that. How do we know that? Because that's the way it's been since the beginning of time. And it just seems as how humans are. So let me tell you something. If God did it once, guess what He could do? He can do it again. If He gave you a victory once, He'll do it again. If He gave you a rescued you once from nothing, He can do it again. If He was there when you needed Him before, He can do it again. We need to remember without a doubt, just like these Israelites did, that God doesn't change. His ways don't change. His character doesn't change. And most importantly, His grace doesn't change. And that's what's so great to see in God. So this is what Joshua was trying to get through their skulls, through their brains, through their minds, just to listen to that. And that's what these rocks would be for. And I think it's interesting, you know, that Joshua told them to do it in the exact way. Something important, we may not look at it, but where did Joshua tell them to carry the rock as they were coming out? On their shoulder. You know, we think, what's the big deal? He was telling them exactly the way things were to be done. It's kind of interesting because everything they carried that came from God, like the Ark of the Covenant, everything was carried upon the shoulder. And, you know, once again, God is wanting to see if they're going to listen, if they're going to follow what's right. We know it's the same thing like we get to Gideon. You remember Gideon, you know, he went through all these different tests, how to choose your men. And he did. And so we see that. So which brings us to this thought now. Since they remember reminding of all that, he says, now I want you to remember the blessings. I want you to remember the blessings that come from your Lord, from our Lord God, and the importance with it. So verses 8 through 14 are going to happen. But let's go ahead and begin with verse 8. I know I have 8 and 9 in there. We're just going to read verse 8 first. You know, the Israelites did just as Joshua commanded. And then he's going to stress the blessings here of obedience. When we say that again, the blessings of obedience. When we obey God, things will come about from it. And that's what he shows us. Someone go ahead and read that for us, please.
And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there.
Thank you. It's very important to see a couple things. You know, there's all these different pictures. I didn't put this picture up there because we don't know for sure. There's all these different thoughts of the rocks that are there. They know we know where the crossing happened at. But there's some rocks found there. And notice very important. It doesn't. A lot of times they'll show them stacked up, and that's kind of how it's. The majority of the rocks they find there aren't stacked, and it makes sense because here in this verse, what does it say they did with them? Just said they laid them down there, didn't they? Now, a lot of times we think it's being stacked up. There are a couple areas there where there's exactly 12 rocks, stones that are lined up in a line, some in a circle, but they can't prove that that was put there by the Israelites over time because a lot of things have changed there, a lot of wars, a lot of battles. And this is the main thing about it. It says when we read the Bible, it's going to say that the ones in the river are there to this day. And that means when it was written. Still there? Well, we don't know. You don't see it anymore sticking up out of the water like it did many years ago, as we would say that. Mom, go ahead.
I just have a question. Is it easier to carry something on your shoulder than it is in your arms?
It depends on how big it is trying to get it up there. That's the thing. They're pretty good sized stones, you know, and they're not like little tiny things. And so, if you're gonna carry this way, I mean, it depends, I don't like carrying things on the shoulder because it hurts. And, I got something, because we got that bone right there, we all do, and we see that. But, you should carry like this. But God wanted to do this for a couple reasons. That people could see it happening, understand what was taking place, and watch them lower it to the ground. And so that's, I guess it just depends on the individual. But God made it very clear. The main point was, you're going to do exactly as Joshua says, and you're not going to move away from it. And that's what we see. Dad, go ahead.
I was going to say that the idea of the stones is like many of the other things that's happened, Noah's Ark, all of these other things, they're not there anymore because maybe God said it served its purpose, and I don't want anybody coming and, making a big deal.
Exactly, yeah. Especially you think about this, when God got rid of the old covenant, and went into the new covenant, there really wasn't a reason for that because we had it all in writing and everything was there. And that's what I look at the same way is, it was reminding them because they didn't have it all in writing. Everybody didn't carry that with them. Over time that changed and you see those things disappear. And plus, people, just the way people are now, that have been for a while, they destroy things, they tear things up. They move things where they go, oh, look, it's a momentum, and they take it with them. I mean, all those kind of things happen that we see. But here's the most important part that we see here, and that's what we find, is that the children of Israel did so just as Joshua commanded. 100%, they did exactly what needed to be done. So the representative of the 12 tribes did exactly as Joshua said for it to be done. They picked up the stones from the riverbed. The very fact that they were able to do so was a sign of the blessing of obedience, and that's what this is all about. The blessing of obedience that is there. If they had not obeyed God and stepped out into the river, they never would have experienced the miracle of faith. Those priests, those priests had to step, and I'll give you pictures again. I showed Wednesday. Remember that water was raging river, and to walk into it was just remarkable. Because of their obedience, they experienced the power of God's obedience and blessings, and they were going to obey Joshua when they were doing this. In fact, we know that in verse 8 it says, let me see right here, and the Lord had spoken to Joshua. And so Joshua knew exactly what God said, and the people were getting the same thing. Joshua was God's appointed leader. Now, basically, Joshua was the new Moses, as we've been stating, and he's doing what needs to be done. So look at verse 9 now. Let's go a little bit further. Someone go and read verse 9, please.
Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there this day.
Now this is interesting here, we find out. So, Joshua wanted people to remember, a lot of times people don't even think about the stones that were on the bank. They just think about the stones in the river. There were two. There were the 12 there on the bank, I remember. And who's to say that the 12 in the middle of the water? Was all the other guys, all the other men. Who did it? Joshua. Notice, Joshua did this. He set this up himself. And he set this up, I'm sure, for a reason, so that these would be stacked. As it says, they would be there to this day. And remember, although, at this time, this is what the water looked like. This is the Jordan River during the harvest time. And it was terrible. It was really massive and vast. And you're like, how are you ever going to cross this? You're not. Like I said, it was anywhere from a mile to 2 miles wide at different times. Here's another view of these are actual pictures of the Jordan, of what we see during the harvest time. So most of the time, it wasn't like this. Most of the time, it was just, I don't know if I have a picture or not. I think so, yeah. Most of the time, this is what it would look like. And now, of course, the rails have been added over years and everything here. This is that area I showed you the other day. That this is more than likely where the priests came across. Remember, everybody else didn't have to go right there. They could line. They were 3,000 feet away from the ark, is what it said. And then they would come across the Jordan River. But this is really shallow. You can see this, and this is nothing at all. If the stones were still there today, which they're not there today anymore, they don't know what happened to them. They were there for a long time. We know exactly for sure, when Joshua was written and everything was written there in the book. But it has disappeared. This is, we said, remember, 3 very important things happen here. Jesus was baptized right here in this vicinity. We find the crossing right here, and also Elijah, where Elijah was taken up with God. So as we look to this, it is amazing with the power that is found in the river that rocks, did not move. It's, how many, you're in a raging river, it can move rocks, can't it? I mean, it will move stones. And so it's interesting how Joshua stacked those up to withstand that time of how the water would be. But also very important, once it was low enough like this, the rocks were more like, they said it along for history, when you look at the history of the Jews, they were standing up out of the water so that you could actually see it during the time when it was easy to cross. So with all these obedience and blessings that come with it, it brings us a little farther to verses 10 to 14. If someone going to read that for us, please.
So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried and crossed over. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people.
Thank you. Oh, no more. There we go.
And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life.
Thank you. So here, once again, remembering what happened in the past with the Israelites. When they obeyed God, God was taking care of everything, was going right. God even took care of them when they weren't obeying, but things weren't good for them. They weren't, they weren't the way it should have been. And remember, we already said this, how many times, it took them 2 years to get the land of Canaan where they could have crossed right over and had it immediately. But they didn't obey God, so of course they were in 40 years of the wilderness because of disobedience. And this is very important to understand. You think about that, when we see that years 2, why didn't God just say, okay, everybody had better ask forgiveness, and then I'll go ahead and let you go in. No, God knew what would happen. That's why he left them there for 38 more years. Why? So all those would die off. All those men that were saying, oh, we can't do it, we can't do this, and everything with it. And he wanted to change that. No one brought him to him and said it could be done. So as we look at this, we understand that the laws of nature tells us that every action has an equal or opposite what? Reaction to it. Every action has a reaction, and we see that law of God is no different. If we obey God, he will bless us, we're told. If we disobey God, it actually says you could be cursed. I mean, that was a terrible thought and a thing to have. So as we look at this, so we get to that question, we ask, how long did it take to cross? I mean, how long did it take to actually cross this? It said the people did what? They hurried and crossed over. Now let me ask this, why people always say, how do we know it wasn't single file? How long do you think single file, 30 or even 3 million people to cross the river? How many do you think how long do you think it's going to take? It's going to take a while. Imagine being those priests. I'd hate to be those priests holding that Ark of the Covenant up the whole time. Remember, that thing's made out of wood, but it's layered in gold. And gold is what? Heavy. It becomes heavy, exactly right. And we see all this. And remember, the staff of Moses, we know the pot of manna is in there, the 10 Commandments are in there, and they were made out of what? Stone. So this is not light. And so that's why, once again, we go, why did God, back the river up so far? And this is the picture again. Remember I said, last time I said, remember Adam. This is where they would cross at, right here in this area. This water backed all the way up to here. It stopped out. So there was no water anywhere through here. But also, all the way down to the Dead Sea, because all that water would have just kept going down the river. So there's a lot of area to cross, and it's real important, we're going to see in a moment. They don't go right here to Jericho immediately. We see Camp Gilgal. It's actually a little bit over here in this direction. So it would make sense for crossing all through here, because they're going to end up over in this area. Let me go ahead and see what else I have here. Let me see, I think that's all I have. Yep. So now jumping to the next area of remembering the miracles, 15 through 24. The waters when the Jordan returned, once the ark again is going to be mentioned. But this is what's interesting. Joshua, inspired by God, is going to change the name of the ark. He's going to change the name of the ark. Is called the Ark of what? The Ark of the Covenant. He's going to change the name here, the way he describes it. So let's go ahead and read this here in chapter 4, 15 through 16. If someone will read that, please.
Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan.
Thank you. So there it is, the Ark of the Testimony. Now, when you think of testimony, what do you think about? Somebody getting up, telling the story, telling what happened. As we would see, you're testifying to what it was. Like we go to court or something, you testify. Testify before a judge, testify before, before a jury. You testify before the people, whatever it may be. And the same thing we see with this. So the ark of the testimony is so important that the ark is to remind people, when you see it, tell people what God has done for you, what he's done in the past. The word testimony also has a very interesting, when you look at the etymology of it, you look at what it actually means. It means to repeat or to do again, the way testimony is used in the Bible. So what that means is constantly tell everybody about what happened here, what was going on. So once again, the remembrance, Joshua commands the priests to come up out of the water carrying the ark. And notice what it says in verses 17 through 18. If someone read that for us, please.
Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, Come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet touched the dry land, the water of the Jordan returned to its place and overflowed all its banks as before.
Thank you. So here we see, come on, there we go. I'll go back, come on, there we go. So here we see, this is an area that's flooded after the harvest is almost over. You know, it's not rushing water anymore. And I think I don't think I showed this next one. I want to look at this. Now, the interesting thing about this, I want you to notice, there's the Jordan River. It's not that big, it's right. All this is what floods during the harvest. That look pretty big? Doesn't like a big area to cross. Think about that. Here's where they are. They're over in this way, in the plains of Moab. Jericho's over here. So look at that crossing, what this would take. Really, more than likely, they said the crossing would come out. They either came up in this direction, because it was easier out of the mountains, or they came over here and made their way across. So it's really important to understand what we have here. Gilgal, I'll just show you real quick some, come on, start working. There we go, pictures. This is Gilgal now. This is one section of it. One side, you see the mountains over there. Here's another area of what it looks like on the other side of it. So it's pretty much vast area. There's a lot of things being done. But here's where they would travel to. Here's where we find they're at right here before they crossed. This is when they crossed. So notice they go up north of Jericho. And this whole area right here is where they're at, which will make it very easy to come over and to attack Jordan. Another way to look at it is right here, as you see it coming back, and then move over to Gilgal. This is important to realize. Do the Jericho people, do they know they're there?
Yes.
They do. We're like, why did they come out and fight? Because they felt their best place to be was where? In the walls. Jericho was supposed to be one of the best, in places you just can't get into. And let me see, I'm out of time. Let me go ahead and read this. So now the people came up to the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Okay, so once again, I want to show you something very important. Does this sound familiar? On the 10th day of the first month, when they came up out of the Jordan? Remember, Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 and 3, the Passover instituted. What day was it instituted on? The 10th day of this month of Nisan. It's like, remember he said, this is going to be your beginning. It's once again, here we see with God, they were coming out of Exodus. Here God's moving them into the Jordan. And it's like it's beginning. Again, everything's beginning right there as we would see this. And then I'll finish up the rest of it. Then they shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over the Jordan on dry land. And the Lord God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before, until we had crossed over. And then verse 24, and that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord that is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. I love the ending of that right there. We didn't just say people of Israel, people of the earth, because remember, all those nations learned about what Israel was doing. They were scared to death of them. And because of what was happening, how they were winning wars left and right. And it was with God. You stay with God, you get protected. And that's what we see happening. We'll go and close there. Any comments or questions from anybody? No one at all. All right, appreciate it. Thanks.